Hi, once again I'm Sydney and I am a servant of the Almighty God. I am also the author of Humanity's Inflection Point and From Whence Cometh Intelligence. These are additional tenets that I follow. Our science reveals God's methods. The key to meeting God's expectation of us is self-control, and diversity is His. As servants, we must honor His diversity. Continuing this series on recognizing God's omnipotence, this version of this episode of the podcast focuses on before evolution, the building blocks of intelligence. And this, I try to break this down so that everyone can understand this and recognize that what Charles Darwin's observed, the whole theory of evolution that we built, there are missing pieces, what I call the missing link in it, but it actually came before what we observe in evolution. So I would make this statement: before you build any intelligent system, you must understand what we call the forces of nature. Let me explain. See, before you have, let me use the example of our automation that we know of today, 2025. Let's say we want to do autonomous cars, right? That's where the level we're getting to right now. Before we build cars, and the cars were just, well, we can consider them dumb, right? Compared to newer versions where we actually build intelligence into them. Here are the prerequisites. The prerequisites to building that intelligent car is we must understand what forces will act on that car, what that car needs to respond to. So we have to build sensors, and in the case of just a car, we build GPS sensors, global positioning satellites we use to pinpoint any place on Earth, right? Now think about this. If we know that fish, birds can navigate, if we could have plugged into their system, whatever their system is, we did not need GPS. So in the case of us trying to build an intelligent car, and when I say intelligent, I mean it can drive, get to some location, because it can't fly, it can't do anything else. We had to put satellites that would identify the entire planet. It can identify every location. We gave it longitude, latitude, but basically a location on the planet. And we also had to put in the road. We had to input data that says these are the roads. Otherwise the car would just say point A, go to point B, and head straight across. Right? So we had to input the roads as well. We built a system of sensors. So that sensor, right, in a few years people may think that cars just came with that and cars just knew how to drive. But we who have been around for a few years, we know that the first GPS sensors, of course it had to have the roads input as well, but all it did was get that location from the satellite. And so it told us where we were, and then with the roads but that first came in a little device, from Garmin, and there were a lot of other companies that made these portable devices. So what that shows, in this case, when it's integrated into a vehicle, right, in a few years people will think it always came in vehicles and cars always knew how to get there. But first we had to build the sensor. We had to build that GPS sensor, put on the satellites, build the sensor so they can get that signal. And then, as in response to that, now we had to tie in. At first, it came as a little machine. So we would walk around, or we would be driving and looking at that and saying, okay, turn right, turn left, looking at what the product of that sensor. So the sensor has to come before you can respond to anything. So when we look at the whole theory of evolution, what Sir Charles Darwin did and published in 1859, the very first plant, animal that he observed had a myriad of sensors, right? And remember, like with GPS, the car cannot do anything without that sensor that tells it the location. But we know bees, birds, fish, they have a sensor in them that tells them their location. This is why they can go from point A to point B, right? So they have their own, for lack of a better thing, say GPS system, right? So to build that sensor, again, we had to put up a satellite, and then we had to have that signal, from the satellite telling us where we are. Similarly, in order to detect light, you must have a light sensor. Our eyes, which have these light sensors, does not do sound. It does not do moisture. It does not do vibration. It does not do chemical sensing. So these are all different kinds of sensors that have to be built. If you look at something as a unicellular animal, a paramecium, amoeba, they can find food that likely involves chemical sensors. And so in our case, it's as if we took all the cars and all the down cars and crushed them, and people just saw cars that are driving around and say, oh, cars were built, and the GPS just came. But we know you must build the sensor first, because the intelligence requires something reacting. We see something, we react to that. Logically, that is the ground, the base version of intelligence. So you must have sensors. We hear things, we react to it. And this is why I'm talking about this basic intrinsic intelligence that we see in spiders, frogs, snakes. Before you build any of those things, you had to have the sensors. And in order to build a sensor, you must understand sound. Because when you build for instance, a light sensor, like our eyes, it is built to respond to a certain range of frequencies, what we call visible light. We know there are animals that can go way beyond that. We know about echolocation in dolphins and bats, and so they have sensors. And so we know where in the evolutionary cycle or history do we see animals built as a block without sensors. We do not see any animal just built that just sit there and says, I have no light sensors, I can't see. I do not have sound sensors, I can't hear. I do not have chemical sensors, so I can't detect around me. So before we put intelligence into a car, we build the sensors. And the reaction to those sensors, now we can actually have it where it's the machine learning and even self-modifying, yes, in the case of what we observe in our evolution, because of those sensors which had to be built. So by the time you build the first intelligent car, we've invested and we built GPS with the LiDAR, radar, all of these things. The sensors have to be built first. And in order to do that, we have to understand what the sensors will be reacting to, what we call the forces of nature. So we have to understand light, we have to understand magnetism, we have to understand sound, we have to understand all of these things before we build sensors that we can embed in something that seems intelligent. So our entire theory of evolution is based on things that happened after whomever or whatever built the sensors and embedded them in these living things, right? And so there must be a period, because again, it does not take much to recognize that we do not have one sensor that does everything, right? We have sense of touch, we have sense of taste, we have sense of sight, sound, all of these things. And there may be others that we don't recognize at this point, because this is where we say, extrasensory type of things. So, but those sensors have to be built. And in order to build them, you must understand what they will respond to. This is the key. This is what precludes everything about evolution. And this is what brings that context of something or someone had to build the sensors. That something or someone had to understand what the sensors would be responding to. See what I'm talking about? So this is where this now goes to the very foundation of our modern sciences, because it makes sense that we see so many logical things about us. Gravity, we see, our protective layer in the protective ozone layer. We see logical things. Now all of this starts to make you like, wow, yeah, if you can design sensors, right? The ozone layer, we have probably destructive rays coming from the sun, energy coming from the sun. The ozone layer is there. It starts making sense, and it goes way beyond. This is why we here talk about a great spirit. But let's take it back to the basics. This is the important part that we must all remember. The entire theory of evolution, the facts of what Sir Charles Darwin he researched and talked about, had to come long after these sensors were perfected by something or someone who understood the forces of nature, quote unquote forces of nature, that these sensors had to respond to. So the sense of sight, of hearing, chemical sensors that even single cell animals would respond to. So you have chemical sensors. It's kind of like we have, with the carbon dioxide sensor and the smoke detectors and all this stuff. We had to understand what it will respond to, build the sensors, then add them to the machines. So if you think of us as living machines, we are filled with sensors. You think about a spider, a worm, a bird, they are filled with sensors. And those sensors were not put into them after they were placed as blocks, and then we add this sensor. Then we add another second sensor, then we add. They were built from the very first thing we noticed in evolutionary cycle, that was built with a range of sensors. And again, I even go into some detail of what a sensor, because a sensor has to entail processors to process information within a certain range, right? If it's a chemical processor, it has to know these chemicals, and then it has to send it somewhere. So there's a lot more involved. But let's keep it at that level. Before you build any intelligent thing, you must understand the forces of nature. And sensors have to be built before you build an organism, right? Because the organism has to, to come alive, to react intelligently, it must already have a range of sensors. So when we look at the work of evolution, we see everything responding because they are filled with sensors. And some of this, I believe, it's like machine learning and self-modifying, because it does not need someone to come in and, oh, I need to reprogram this. No, it's been built so well that it can respond to those sensors and determine that a change is required. These are what we call mutations. Okay, so this is the bringing together of science with the Creator. That gap that we left, this is why I say nature is a manifestation of God's omnipotence. Nature is a manifestation because all of these things are built intelligently, and we have so far ignored it. Religions continue to ignore it. They're going backwards in time and looking at, the scriptures, which may or may not be correct, but they're meant to teach us. What this shows is that science now has to reconcile, and I will be starting some fundraising to get the organization going, so that this knowledge gets out there. We start questioning and recognizing logically why we must accept a creator, the Great Spirit. Okay? So it has to do with, let me reiterate, it has to do with, before you build anything intelligently, you must have sensors. Before you have sensors, you must understand the forces of nature. So if we think about in the, after the Big Bang or whatever you want to believe in, there must have been someone who says these are the forces that any intelligent thing must react to, and start building sensors. The sensors like the GPS, when we think about our example, how many years was spent building GPS? And then we tested it. We took GPS and we were driving around with the little things, and we were going on excursions and, hiking and all that with the portable GPS. Then we decided, okay, it works. Let's put it into a vehicle and make the vehicle intelligent. It's a similar thing, whether it's moisture, it's sound, chemicals. We have to build sensors first. So, and to build the sensors, we must understand what it must sense. We must understand chemicals. We must understand the signals that those things would trigger. So we have to understand the forces of nature. Then we build sensors. We aggregate sensors into anything to make it behave intelligently. When you see a plant turn towards the light, that is a demonstration. Phototropism is a demonstration of that intelligence. Okay? And so, if we ignore all of this and we say, oh, just nature, well, no. Question things, right? And this is where, as a seeker of truth, you recognize that, yes, this is where we get to, and this is what will change the world, because now the Creator will be brought back into science. The Creator that religion is all confused or acts confused about, because the prophets talk about one Creator, and then we start worshipping prophets and religions being the most divisive force on the planet. But when we start looking back to the Great Spirit, the Creator that gave us sensors, embedded them in living things, so that living things can mutate based on those sensors. See, the picture is coming together, and it may take a while, but I need you. I need your assistance. This information is now available through those discoveries of what has been there. Okay, all of this, the ability to store memory, all of this stuff that I go into in, from whence cometh intelligence, and where we can get to humanity with humanity's inflection point. I need your assistance. I will have some things getting out there, and I'll tell you more about it. But take this again. In order to build intelligence, you must build sensors. To build sensors, you must understand the forces of nature. So the Creator knew those forces, built the sensors, embedded them in living things so that they can react and act intelligently. The product of which now we are beginning to understand. I want to remind you one more time, it's not coincidence that you ran into this series. Okay, it's a series of actions, and I need your help. We can build this together. We can disseminate this information so that the world, we start bringing true brotherhood of mankind, science, religion, everything. Yes, it's disruptive. I know it is disruptive, but that's what we do. Right? We have to disrupt these, something that's there, it's good, but it can get better. We can make it better. We can disrupt it, make it better. Science, religion, all of it. Bring us towards the brotherhood of mankind. I want to thank you one more time. Take this message, pick up copies of the book, and let's take this forward. And until next time, may God bless us all. Thanks again.